In the final months of the Second World War, the battleships of the U.S. Navy, USN, ranged across the archipelago of Japan, bombarding industrial, military and logistical targets at will. The Japanese military lacked enough ships, planes and fuel to defend the nation, leaving coastal areas at the mercy of the steel behemoths. Although most of the credit, such that it is, for the destruction of urban Japan belongs to the bombers of the U.S. Army Air Force, the battleships and cruisers of the Navy contributed their share. At the end of the war, most of the USN's battleships were scrapped, sunk as targets or placed into reserve. When the United States went to war again, earlier than anyone had expected, 3 battleships of the Iowa class returned to service, joining their sister USS Missouri off the coast of Korea. For 3 years, these ships would rain terror down upon North Korean and Chinese forces. Response and reactivation. The ferocity and efficiency of the North Korean offensive of June 1950 into South Korea took everyone, including the U.S. Navy, by surprise. Nevertheless, local forces quickly responded, including the Oregon City-class heavy cruiser USS Rochester, which used its 8-inch guns to soften beaches at Incheon and elsewhere. USS Missouri, the only U.S. battleship to have remained operational since World War II, arrived in Korean waters on September 19, 1950. In a few weeks she would conduct extensive shore bombardments along the coast of North Korea. Missouri continued to provide fire support after the tide of war turned in November. In December, she conducted bombardments to ensure the survival of U.S. troops retreating from the People's Liberation Army's surprise offensive. Notably, the U.S. Navy decided not to transfer the 3 heavy cruisers of the Des Moines class, which mostly remained in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. These cruisers, carrying autoloading 8-inch guns, could lay waste to a coastal area nearly as effectively as a battleship. However, they were regarded as too important to the mission of deterring the Soviet Union to risk transfer to the Pacific. Instead, the U.S. government decided to reactivate the 3 other Iowa-class battleships. Iowa, New Jersey and Wisconsin had all entered the reserve fleet before the beginning of the Korean War. All 3 remained in excellent condition, and required minimal modification in order to return to service. The most significant change came with the replacement of World War II-era floatplanes by helicopters. The Navy recommissioned New Jersey in November 1950, Wisconsin in March 1951 and Iowa in August 1951. Several heavy cruisers also conducted tours off of Korea, but the Navy declined to reactivate any of the 13 other battleships in the reserve fleet. Operations. Each of the 4 battleships acted as a flagship at one time or another, contributing facilities necessary to the coordination of broader naval warfare efforts. More to the point, however, the battleships used both their 16-inch main armament and their 5-inch secondary armament to pound Chinese and North Korean positions along the coast. These positions included cave systems, concealed artillery and command posts. As with the end of the Second World War, the battleships also hit strategic and operational targets, including railways, industrial parks and transport centers. These attacks, which could range up to 20 miles inland, periodically disrupted but did not stop communist efforts to resupply their armies in the field. Extensive mining reduced the freedom of action of U.S. naval forces, to the extent that the battleships only rarely operated against North Korean and Chinese positions along the Yellow Sea. Although communist aircraft did conduct attacks against major U.S. ships early in the war, UN air and naval superiority made such sorties difficult as the war proceeded. Other than mines, the main danger to the battleships came through coastal artillery, which they regularly sparred against. However, the effectiveness of the USN in bombarding all along the peninsula showed both countries how vulnerable they were to naval attack.